policies by the Liberals are hurting all of Canada, not just the workers and the industries in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba for that matter. And so, Mr. Speaker, we need to work with the sector to ensure that workers are fully employed and that everybody is benefiting from this great resource that we have locked in the ground. And leaving it there and using foreign oil is not the answer. But that's exactly what this Prime Minister wants to do.
And with that, we'll now go to statements by members. Déclaration de député. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a wonderful weekend for the Greens in Canada. It was the end of our leadership race, and we have made history. I am very delighted with the choice of our new leader, Annamie Paul.
Soon, I hope, walk into this place as the first Black leader of a federal political party. I hope she will soon walk into this place as the first Black woman to head a federal political party. She comes to us with great experience. She came to this city to get her law degree. She went to Princeton for her master's. She's worked at the International Criminal Court. She's worked at our embassies overseas. She's worked at the very grassroots level to help communities, to increase diversity, and to fight the climate crisis. She's extraordinary, and I hope we all wish her the best of luck in winning the seat in Toronto Centre so she can be here soon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member,
The Honourable Member for Lac Saint-Laurie.
Beaconsfield has lost a beloved and respected people's representative. Councillor Al Gardner left us suddenly and far too soon this past summer. A loyal public servant, Al treated everything with the thoughtfulness and rigor of someone who always wanted to do the very best for his constituents and community. Always welcoming and kind, a true gentleman, Al was a friend to everyone. Al Gardner exemplified an approach to politics that is fundamental to a healthy democracy. The political was never personal. He always looked at both sides of an issue, and this allowed him to find common ground. Last but by no means least, Al was a dog lover. He adopted many, and whenever he was out and about in the community, he was never without a treat in his pocket, just in case. We have lost a good man, and I ask the House to join me in offering Al's son, Jeffrey, and sister Fern our deepest condolences at this time of great loss.
The Honourable Member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, today is World Teachers' Day, la Journée Mondiale.
It is World Teachers' Day.
It's an occupation I'm quite familiar with, having taught at both the secondary and elementary levels since 1995 in Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. I want to thank all teachers across Canada for pouring out their heart and soul to inspire and educate young people. It's not at all an easy task, but they have chosen this profession because they care. So often, I've been amazed as I've watched my colleagues engage and motivate their students with creative lessons in whatever subject matters or grade they may teach. Teachers have a powerful impact in the lives of our young people. We can all look back and remember a teacher who has breathed life into us. 2020 has been a very challenging year for so many of us, and that certainly has been true with teachers. Mr. Speaker, I invite all members of the House to join with me to acknowledge our nation's teachers in this very challenging time.
The Honourable Member for Egmont.
Mr. Speaker, the month of October is a time to celebrate small businesses across the country and the valuable contributions they make to our communities. The face of small business in my riding of Egmont includes farmers, fishers, tourism operators, the service sector, manufacturers, and food processors, all of whom have endured a challenging peak season due to COVID-19. Les petites entreprises.
Small businesses are very important to Egmont, my riding.
Take risks to provide their community with local goods and services, and by taking this risk, they are providing opportunities to others. Thanks to the hard work of local small business owners, Egmont is building a stronger economy that benefits everyone, and as a result, we all have the opportunity to share in our community's progress. Supporting small business has and remains the best way forward for our national economic recovery. That's why our Liberal government continues to support small businesses.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. October 5th is World Teachers' Day, Mr. Speaker, and I want to highlight the dedication of these men and women who are not only those who shape future generations, but are leaders in times of crisis. This year, going back to school was historic and unprecedented. I will not forget having seen the young kids from elementary school with their masks on, following their teachers into the schools. And a bit further on, there were masked teens waiting for their school bus. I knew that I would not see the older kids because, of course, they were taking remote classes cut off from their social circles. It was surreal. As a former teacher, I knew that they were facing the unknown, but were trying to make things feel normal for their students, even if they are scared for their own health and the health of their families. Nonetheless, they are not going to pass that fear on to their students. The teachers in Quebec and elsewhere are used to dealing with few resources and having to produce miracles. They will ensure that the kids get the best education possible. That is why the Bloc Québécois wishes to honor them today. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Scarborough Centre.
Sorry, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to recognize the residents and the hardworking staff of Hellenic Home for the Aged in my riding of Scarborough Centre. As a long-term care home, they have been on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. The first wave was difficult for them. Residents were unable to see their loved ones and under very difficult circumstances, spending much time apart from their own families. The staff worked very hard to keep residents safe. I would like to extend my condolences to the Hellenic Homes community for the lives lost during this pandemic. We owe it to our seniors to do everything we can to keep them safe. We need to develop new national standards for long-term care, and I look forward to working with organizations in my riding to bring their ideas and their voices to this discussion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cariboo, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, October 4th to 10th is Mental Illness Awareness Week. Mental Illness Awareness Week is about the need for dialogue, the need to allow anyone who is struggling the opportunity to express the pain, the suffering, the hurt that they feel as they struggle with the various health problems without judgment. Those suffering in silence need to be able to come forward and know that they will be believed, not seen as weak. They need to know that we're fighting for the services and support that they need. Until we recognize mental illness as a true health problem as a nation, we won't be able to move forward. All of us here in this House today have a responsibility to keep this issue at the forefront of the debate, not just today, but for every day. We can do more, and we can do it together. I'm proud to sit on an all-party mental health caucus with colleagues from across this great country. In the coming weeks and months, you'll be hearing from us all as we work together to raise the profile of mental illness among Canadians. We have a responsibility to make sure those in need have the tools necessary to get better. Mr. Speaker, there's no health without mental health.
Member for Vancouver Centre.
Deep gaps in our social infrastructure, and let us see the desperation of our most vulnerable, such as sex trade workers. Many cannot claim benefits like CERB because the work they do is criminal. They cannot pay rent. They face an increased amount of societal violence, at risk in shelters, and stigmatized by many. I shout out to an organization in Vancouver named WISH, which provides a safe, non-judgmental place for sex workers facing gender-based violence, giving them shelter, food, and respite, helping them gain workforce skills if they wish to exit the trade. WISH recently opened the first overnight shelter in Canada for street workers, and last week their executive director, Maybrat Bayen, won the YMWCA Women of Distinctions Award for nonprofits. Bravo WISH, keep defending the vulnerable and speaking out for the voiceless.
The Honourable Member for Gatineau. Mr. Speaker, Outaouais is lucky to have extraordinary businesses that make our region really dynamic and that help to ensure our recovery and prosperity. The first wave of the pandemic hit businesses in Gatineau hard, particularly those in the downtown cores. Thanks to support measures by the Government of Canada and the vigilance of the people of Gatineau, we managed to reopen businesses this summer. But now we're at a crossroads with the arrival of the second wave. We must continue to buy local and to encourage local businesses while respecting health and safety measures. The business community has been able to adapt to ensure the health and safety of all. And the governments have answered the call to support small and medium-sized businesses with additional measures. And this goes hand in hand with respecting the public health advice. I know that the people of Gatineau will heed this appeal because the health of our local economy depends on it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Kildonan, St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to recognize the parents, students, and staff at John Pritchard School in my riding. Last month, the school celebrated its 105th anniversary. Over the last century, John Pritchard students have lived through countless challenges, including 2 world wars and 2 global health pandemics. The John Pritchard School family is facing adversity once again, with 250 students now enrolled in remote learning following a recent COVID-19 outbreak at the school. My heart goes out to all those affected. I am praying for a speedy recovery for those battling COVID-19. I want to thank the teachers, support staff, administrative officials, and parents for rising to the occasion and putting the education of our kids first by implementing at-home learning during this unprecedented time. I also want to thank the Kildonan St. Paul community for donating new items to my Back to School Supplies initiative, which will help provide lower-income students in our community with much-needed core school and support for your fellow neighbors. Makes me proud to represent this community as your member of parliament. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake. Mr. Speaker, today we celebrate World Teachers' Day here in Canada and around the world. Today we celebrate the teaching profession and we express our recognition to all of our teachers. As a former educator and a member of a family of educators, I know all too well just how hard the teachers are working to ensure that our kids get the best education possible. The COVID-19 pandemic has added significant challenges to the ones already faced by our educational system. It's impossible to overestimate the leadership that teachers show. They have responded to the crisis, providing online schooling and supporting vulnerable students, as well as help to open our schools. I want all teachers to know that their passion, their hard work and sacrifices have not gone unnoticed. You have our admiration and our gratitude. Thank you.
Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Mr. Speaker, scientists around the world have always said that easily accessible testing is the key to combating the spread of COVID-19 while helping people live normal lives. That is why Conservatives have been calling for rapid and easily accessible tests since March. This Liberal government is months behind our allies when it comes to approving and procuring COVID-19 testing devices. Now that a rapid testing device has finally been approved, the Manitoba government is being blocked from purchasing them. Why? Why? Because this Prime Minister has blocked the direct sale of these rapid testing devices to provincial governments, leaving them unavailable for Canadians to access. For months, Canadians have had to wait days in worry, wondering if they have COVID-19 because this government has dragged their feet. It's time for the Prime Minister to get out of the way, Mr. Speaker, and let provinces make these tests readily available.
The Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today regarding the layoffs recently announced at Suncor Energy. 15% of Suncor Energy's workforce will be laid off in the coming weeks. This comes directly as a result of this government's anti-energy policies. Instead of exporting our oil, this government is exporting our jobs. 2 weeks ago, this government delivered the throne speech. The only thing mentioned about oil and gas in the throne speech is how they will play a role in getting to net zero emissions. I believe the Liberals' plan to get to net zero to eliminate oil and gas in Canada. This is not a sound way to build back the economy. While there is still a huge need for oil and gas and all the byproducts it produces. While this government does not support Canadian producers, they think nothing of bringing oil in from foreign countries such as the United States and instead support Donald Trump in making America great again. Mr. Speaker, the Suncor layoffs are just the most recent example. When is this government going to stop exporting jobs and start exporting oil?
The honourable member for Hamilton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, when the COVID pandemic hit earlier this year, the National Emergency Stockpile had already been grossly mismanaged, with 3 warehouses shut down and millions of PPE thrown into the trash. Canadian companies have begun producing PPE, but over fears of being outbid again, the government refuses to make the names of these public companies to ensure that the supply remain available to Canada. If this government is admitting that free market capitalism is putting us at risk, then we must commit to starting government production of PPE as a part of our just recovery for the manufacturing workers and to ensure that Canadians will always have access to safe, affordable, and reliable PPE. With close to 10,000 deaths in the second wave upon us, the Liberals must, at a minimum, confirm that the contract signed with the Canadian PPE producers ensure that Canada will have first access to PPEs indefinitely, or we risk being outbid once again.
The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, Edu Alcohol is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. It is a well-known organization dedicated to making Quebecers more educated and aware of alcohol consumption. For 30 years, in campaign after campaign, Edu Alcohol has helped change mindsets and help people adopt healthier attitudes in a relationship with alcohol. We're proud of what has been achieved. Quebecers still drink, but not as excessively as elsewhere in Canada, and the number of deadly accidents caused by drinking and driving has dropped by 20% in 30 years. Great progress has been made, but we must continue. These challenges are going to continue to be the focus of work by Edu Alcohol, and Edu Alcohol will work to help end family, sexual, and partner violence due to drinking, and will also help to end drinking and driving under the influence. Moderation is much better. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Blasted COVID. I'm a business owner. The government closed my shop and then reopened it. My clients prefer to use their computers. I'm a restaurateur. My dining room closed and I was asked to reinvent myself, but my fridges are still full again. I'm a therapist. My waiting room is empty, but I cannot ease your pain and I'm suffering because I can't help you. I'm a young entrepreneur. My clients never showed up. My dream is dying. I don't know if I'll be strong enough to start over. I'm a student. Since I was little, I was told all about prom and parties and university, and today I go on TikTok for laughs between 2 remote classes. I'm a business owner. I have lots of energy, but my shop has closed. I'm depressed because I'm shut in all the time. I'm a senior. I've reached the age of freedom, but I've never felt as abandoned as I do now. My grandkids have arrived, but I've never met them. I'm someone who has not yet been named. I've not talked about on the TV. The governments have forgotten me. I have no one to talk to. I'm an MP. I can't shake people's hands anymore, but I still need to reassure so many people. Despite your mask talk, our hearts and our ears are open. The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in the House to pay tribute to the hard work of community organizations in Vaudreuil-Soulanges. These organizations have continued to provide essential services to those in the greatest need in my community throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. To support their work, the Community Support Emergency Fund has paid out over $350,000 to many community organizations in my riding. I'm thinking, among others, of Café de la Débrouille Café, the Centre d'Action Bénévole, l'Actuel, the Centre Notre-Dame de Fatima, Le Versant, MRC de Vaudreuil-Soulanges, Parrainage Civique, and Réseau Emploi Entrepreneurship. Their contributions have made a huge difference to our community during these very difficult times. And on behalf of everyone in Vaudreuil-Soulanges, I wish to thank them. It is by working together that we will survive.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, around the world,
countries are procuring hundreds of millions of rapid tests. The WHO procured 120 million, the United States 165 million, France is performing 1 million tests a week, and Italy now has 30-minute tests at their airport. But on Friday, we learned that this government is blocking Manitoba from being able to procure their own rapid tests. The Prime Minister has been months late on securing rapid tests for Canadians. Why are they now making the provinces go to the back of the line as well?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me just begin by congratulating the member opposite on his election as Leader of the Official Opposition, and to say how pleased I was by his and his wife's recovery from COVID-19. I share the member opposite's view that rapid testing is absolutely essential to our health. It is absolutely essential to our economic recovery. That's why I'm pleased we bought 7.9 million rapid tests last week.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister said rapid tests are essential, but her own minister is sending mixed signals from the federal government. Last month, the health minister said that provinces were free to develop and deploy their own rapid tests. 9 days later, the health minister told the government of Manitoba that they could not buy the recently approved Health Canada test. The health minister has flip-flopped on the border, on the risks of COVID, on the use of masks, and now on rapid tests. When will the government stop interfering in provincial COVID plans?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me say that the Health Minister is a cherished colleague who is doing a fantastic job. When it comes to provinces and the fight against the coronavirus, this is an effort that we must undertake together. That is why over the summer we agreed the Safe Restart Agreement, $19 billion to the provinces to support their fight against coronavirus, and another $2 billion for the safe restart of schools.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, several regions of our country have to fight with the second wave. We've had to make sacrifices to fight against COVID, but yesterday there were more than 1,000 new cases. If we don't have rapid testing, people have more chance of spreading this virus. The Prime Minister promised quick testing 6 months ago, and after all this time, we're still wondering, how come rapid testing is not ready for the second wave? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you. I agree with the Leader of the Opposition in terms of what Quebec and the provinces are doing, and I support these measures. It's very important, and we have to work with Quebec in terms of rapid testing. We purchased 7.9 million rapid tests last week, and the tests will be in Canada next week.
Mr. Speaker, they just ordered tests 6 months after they promised they would. Their slow response is impacting millions of Canadians. In Quebec, it's the long lineups. In Ontario, it's the labs who are stretched to the limit. In Manitoba, it's confusion over buying rapid tests. Mr. Speaker, when is the Prime Minister going to take the health of Canadians seriously and roll out a real plan for rapid testing?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear. The Prime Minister, and indeed I believe all members of this House, take the health of Canadians extremely seriously. When it comes to rapid testing, I was very pleased that last week we were able to announce the procurement of 7.9 million rapid tests. Those tests will be in Canada next week, and we will have more to announce about rapid tests very soon.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians and Quebecers know that the Liberal government refused to close borders in time for ideological reasons. The New York Times showed that there was nothing scientific in the idea of keeping the borders open. The Prime Minister preferred to follow the WHO's erroneous policies rather than listening to Canadians. How come the Prime Minister did not want to close the border when he should have? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. If I may, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to correct one small thing. Quebecers are Canadians. With respect to the border, I have to say that I'm very proud of our government's policy, particularly with respect to the border with the United States. We were successful in limiting non-essential travel, and at the same time, trade that is so essential was able to continue. And we're going to continue to do that, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, we're in the midst of a second wave in Quebec. More than 1,100 new cases today. It's incredible. And our health system is bursting at the seams. And yet, Ottawa is refusing to not increase health transfers to treat Quebecers. They're being stubborn. And this government spent over 300 billion on the pandemic, but only 500 million in health transfers for people during a health crisis. That's 15 cents on every $100 spent. 15 cents for health. When are they going to do their fair share? The Honourable Deputy Minister. Mr. Speaker, I agree entirely that the second wave is very serious, and we're taking it seriously. And this is why we reached an agreement on the safe restart, and we're looking at almost $300 billion for Quebec and for the safe recovery. The Honourable for La Prairie. These numbers speak for themselves. Quebec and the provinces said they had a shortfall of $28 billion, and they asked for into health transfers, and they only got $500 million. That's what they're asking in health. But the provinces and Quebec are asking you for more health to treat people. And health care workers are asking for more help. And what are you waiting for? So you can help Quebecers to receive care. The Honourable Deputy Minister. Mr. Speaker, we understand very well how serious this situation is. And this is exactly why that we gave Quebec nearly $3 billion for its economic recovery and for health measures. We also helped seniors in Quebec with the Canadian Armed Forces. We were there when Quebec needed us, and we will always be there for Quebecers. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are clearly in the second wave of the COVID crisis, but the same problems continue. We are afraid for our seniors in long-term health care, and it's hard to have access to COVID-19 testing. So what's the plan for the second wave? What is the plan to improve access to testing for COVID-19? And what's the plan to help our seniors in long-term care? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you very much for the question. Our plan is to continue to work closely with the provinces, with the territories, and with municipalities. In terms of rapid testing, last week we purchased 7.9 million rapid tests, and in terms of our approach over the summer for safe restart, we set aside $19 million to help provinces and territories.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that we are not headed in the wrong direction. The Prime Minister said, quote, "We're not going in the right direction." But the Prime Minister is the sole person responsible for steering our country in the right direction. But the Prime Minister isn't taking action. Right now in Ontario, there are 49 outbreaks in long-term care homes where hundreds of seniors are infected with COVID-19. But we know that these problems have existed before. So what is the plan? What is the plan to help our seniors? When will families know that their loved ones in long-term care homes are finally safe?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I must agree with the Leader of the NDP about one thing. We truly are at a crossroads when it comes to COVID-19. The second wave is here right now, particularly acute in Quebec and in Ontario, and each one of us has a responsibility to do everything we can to flatten that curve. When it comes to fighting the coronavirus, we are committed to continuing to work in close collaboration with the provinces, with the territories, with municipalities. It's the Canadian way, and we're going to keep on doing it.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. The Canadian way to solve problems is to work together, but unfortunately in March, during the first wave, the Liberal government dragged its heels on the border issue. We have to recognize this. During the second wave, the Liberal government is still dragging its heels about recognizing rapid testing. 1,200 new cases in Quebec today, and sometimes people have to wait a week for testing results. How come the government is still dragging its heels on this file? The Honourable Health Minister.
Opposite is right. We actually have to work incredibly hard together, provinces, territories, and local public health units to fight the second wave of COVID-19. And we know that testing is one aspect of controlling COVID-19. So is a strong contact tracing regime, and so is isolation of close contacts. Mr. Speaker, we've been there for provinces and territories, including all Canadians across this country. We'll continue to work with provinces and territories. This is a very, very sneaky virus, and we know that all hands on board is what we need to get through it together. Thank you.
The Honourable for Louis Saint Laurent. There's no results. We're not seeing any. They closed the borders in March, and we're facing rapid testing issues. But in March, there was results. There was testing that was provided results in 15 days. So there are results. Japan has seen them. How come Canada is dragging its heels in terms of rapid testing?
The premise of the question of the member opposite is incorrect. We've had rapid testing in Canada for several months. In fact, we have nearly 70 gene expert machines across the country in provinces and territories and rural and remote communities to protect Indigenous communities. And we've continued to add tests as they become available in Canada. In fact, the Abbott test is our third test to approve. That is a rapid test. We'll continue to work with manufacturers, with provinces and territories to be there no matter what it takes. Thank you.
The Honourable for Louis Saint Laurent. Well, if everything's going so well, how come Quebec is still waiting? People still have to wait a week to get results. Some people are lucky, can have the results in a few hours. Good for them. But most Canadians can't get results in a reasonable time frame. How come the government has dragged its heels for so long on rapid testing?
I know that the provinces of Quebec and Ontario in particular are struggling with their testing strategies and with their capacity. We're there, Mr. Speaker, for provinces and territories that need additional help. We have a rapid response program where we go into different jurisdictions to support them, whether it's with contact tracing needs, whether it's with human resources for long-term care, whether it's with epidemiological expertise. Mr. Speaker, we've been there for provinces and territories. We'll continue to be there for provinces and territories because at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, no matter where a Canadian lives, they deserve excellence in health care. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Nose Hill.
Well, the minister just claimed that there was rapid tests for Canadians, yet Carl Skodstad in Thunder Bay said he had to wait 9 days to get his toddler tested. If you're keeping your kid at home for 2 weeks and you have to stay at home, that's difficult on families and the child's education. So she's claiming that there's rapid tests. Carl says there isn't. Who's right? The incompetent health minister or Carl?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, my heart goes out to Carl because, of course, it's challenging. He's absolutely right when we're waiting for results of tests to determine whether or not we can continue with our life. Mr. Speaker, we've been working very closely with the province of Ontario to deal with the backlog of nearly 78,000 tests or so that they are experiencing. Mr. Speaker, of course, as they refine their testing strategy, we're there with them to provide additional supports in clearing that backlog. Mr. Speaker, we'll be there for Ontarians, including Carl, including all Ontarians across the province, to make sure that they get the test that they need when they need it.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Nose Hill.
But that's the point. The government hasn't been there for Carl. And in fact, in Thunder Bay, Dr. Stuart Kennedy, the physician leading up the COVID-19 response at the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Centre, says that the turnaround time test for COVID-19 is problematic. It's because they don't have access to rapid tests. That's this minister's job. And if she can't even do the job in her own backyard, what hope does the rest of Canada have? When are we going to have access to rapid tests?
Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I speak with Dr. Kennedy every single week on the situation in Thunder Bay, and so I'm excited that the member opposite knows so much about my own home community. I gladly include her in briefings with the department if she wishes to take me up on understanding the challenges that Ontario is facing, including on testing capacity. In fact, in Thunder Bay, they have the capacity to do 300 lab tests, but the rest, they don't have the capacity to process. So we're going to be there for Ontario, Mr. Speaker, along with all other provinces and territories as they continue to work through testing strategies that make sense and that will work for all Canadians. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
If only there was some way to rapidly test people in Canada, let's say at home, using tests that have been approved around the world that other countries have, maybe we could have more access to tests. Yep. The minister fundamentally doesn't understand this. She sat on her thumbs for months. Carl, her head of her hospital, they're telling her this, and she's like, yeah, this is great, it's fine. This government is incompetent, and it's killing people. There are people that can't see their loved ones, they can't go to work because of the lack of rapid tests, and they sit here and try and sell us that it's okay. When are we getting rapid tests?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate my offer for the member opposite to be fully briefed by my department on what a comprehensive testing strategy looks like, because clearly when she indicates that perhaps people could test themselves at home and that would solve our problem, she's indicating a lack of awareness that, in fact, once people receive the test, something has to be done with that test, Mr. Speaker, and that's where the real work begins with public health in the terms of contact tracing and isolation of close contacts. Mr. Speaker, I'm on the ground every single week talking to public health units at local levels to understand what their challenges are, and I certainly invite her to take the briefing at her convenience.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, small businesses such as restaurants and bar survived the first wave of COVID by going into debt, but this is no longer an option. Loans aren't enough. If we want to avoid thousands of bankruptcies during the second wave, we have to help companies pay their fixed costs. Quebec has established a forgivable financial aid for fixed costs and is asking Ottawa to participate. Since April, the Bloc has been asking Ottawa for help with fixed costs. Quebec has taken action, but what is the federal government waiting for? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, which is a very important one. In the speech from the throne, we promised help for SMEs to pay their fixed costs. And this is more important than ever, as we are in the second wave of COVID, and provinces and Quebec have taken strong measures to face this. So we really have to be there, and we will be. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Mr. Speaker, what the government announced Friday was more loans. But there are limits to how much debt bars and restaurants can take on. We have reached the limit of what we can carry forward. In the throne speech, the government promised to help companies who have to shut their doors for public health reasons. When will they finally walk the talk? Will Ottawa join the Quebec government and offer support for fixed costs for businesses in red zones? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. The answer is yes. And I've discussed this issue with Éric Girard yesterday evening. I am going to speak to him again this evening. And I have a question for the Bloc. When we've done the technical work on this, I hope the Bloc will vote in favour of it. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, few sectors have suffered as much from COVID as the cultural industry. Life was just getting back when theatres and cinemas were once again closed. Our artists are now in lockdown again, and they're worried. Quebec has announced assistance for ticket income in the throne speech. Ottawa has committed to specific support for the cultural sector aside from the CERB and the wage subsidy, because we know it's not enough to save this industry. it says that it will provide support for other industries such as tourism. But current programs aren't enough. What is Ottawa waiting to announce something? The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. We're also very concerned by the situation in the arts and cultural sector. That's why our government has provided $4 billion in assistance for this sector to get through this very serious crisis, including $500,000 in emergency funding and $50 million last week, so that filming for TV and films can resume in Quebec, and will always be there for the arts and cultural sector. Thank you very much. The Honourable for Charlebourg, Saint-Charles. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The arrogance of the Liberal Party starts at the top and is trickling down to its MPs. We want this government to prioritize rapid testing, but instead of taking responsibility for their inaction, they're blaming others. Last week, the member for Gatineau attacked officials at Outaouais Health by saying that often in the Outaouais region, health decisions are made that leave people puzzled. Will the Prime Minister call him to order and ask him to apologize? The Honourable Minister for Health.
It's important that we understand, all of us in this House, that every public health official, every healthcare worker, every person in our healthcare systems across the country at local, provincial, and federal levels are working flat out to protect Canadians' health. I think that in this side of the House, and certainly I would hope all of us understand that we owe a debt of gratitude to these hardworking professionals who, in many cases, have not slept for months.
The Honourable for Charlebourg, Saint-Charles. Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly why the comments made by the member for Gatineau are shameful. At a time when we should be grateful to our healthcare professionals, the Liberals are attacking them. Many of our healthcare workers are tired, overworked, and need support, but instead, the member for Gatineau has chosen to insult healthcare workers by questioning their supply strategies and their management abilities. Will the member rise in this House and apologize for his paternalistic attitude, yes or no?
Speaker, I think I can say that all of us have a profound respect for the work of healthcare workers all across this country, regardless of which area they're working in. Mr. Speaker, we know that we can't get through this without our healthcare workers, and furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we know that people are learning every single day about this virus, how to manage it, how to contain it, how to deal with the second wave. And Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be part of a government that knows that when it gets hard, we roll up our sleeves and we work even harder.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Saint-Charles. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can we explain why the Gatineau Hospital bought a cutting-edge rapid testing machine for COVID? And the Minister of Quebec told me that we have a Ferrari in the garage, but we're just waiting for permission to use it. So what is the federal government waiting to give Ottawa Health Centre the green light? The Honourable Health Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm unaware of the particular testing device that the member is speaking about, but I will certainly dig in and find out exactly what the delay is and what kind of equipment that they are waiting for. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Edmonton, Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local businesses in Edmonton have been hit hard by COVID. Instead of helping small businesses like Fred's Truck Outfitters, this government laid out a flawed rent assistance program that didn't do the job. And now that the Liberals have ended the program without replacing it, Fred and other business owners are left scrambling to stay open as a second wave hits. Small businesses create jobs and contribute to our communities and the country. When will the Prime Minister stand up for small businesses and support them into the second wave?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
I'd like to thank the member from Edmonton Strathcona for that really important question. And personally, I love the small businesses of Edmonton Strathcona in particular. In the speech from the throne, we committed to extending CEBA to support small businesses across the country and to supporting small businesses with their fixed costs, including rent. That is something that we are working on right now with the provinces and with the municipalities. Small businesses do need our continued support, and we're going to be there for them.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
A damning report released today says that the decisions made by the Public Health Agency of Canada put healthcare workers at risk because, unlike other countries, it failed to learn lessons from SARS. Canada's infection rate for healthcare workers is twice that of the global rate. The Nurses Union has not been properly consulted. Some nurses were denied N95 masks, and the safety needs for long-term care homes were ignored. The president of the PHAC stepped down only after 18 months, and now this. Does the minister accept any responsibility, or is she just going to point fingers again?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, I accepted full responsibility and insisted that the union, CFNU, the Canadian Federation of Nurses Union, was at the table as guidance continued to be developed for the appropriate use of personal protective equipment in hospital and clinical settings. In fact, the CFNU was included in those guidance documents. Their suggestions were included, and updated guidance was released. And we will continue to work with unions who protect the health and safety of workers across this country. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, in Halifax West and across Nova Scotia, we're seeing a concerning decline in housing affordability. The government's taken important steps to help Canadians find an affordable place to call home with the National Housing Strategy, which has had a real impact for communities across Canada. Still, many Nova Scotians are concerned about paying rent. Could the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development please provide an update to the House on the measures being taken to make rent more affordable?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank my honourable colleague from Halifax West for his question and his strong advocacy on behalf of his constituents and on housing issues in general. We know that people in Nova Scotia and across the country have been worried about making ends meet during these challenging times. That's why I am so pleased that last week we were able to launch the Canada-Nova Scotia Targeted Housing Benefit, which will provide up to 6,100 households in the province with an average of over $200 a month to help cover the cost of housing. This is real help going directly into the pockets of Nova Scotians, and this is another example of the National Housing Strategy at work, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Carleton.
Thank you.
Germany, the UK, and Japan are also dealing with COVID-19, but their unemployment rate is half ours here in Canada. Not only do we have double the unemployment rate of those three countries, we also have the highest unemployment rate in the G7, 3% higher than the OECD. We have the worst jobs record here in Canada among the entire G7, and it's because of this government's policies. Will this government do away with its anti-employment policies to allow Canadians to get back to work? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives do not want to admit it, but our economic policy is working for workers. You don't have to take my word for it. I quote, Canada is ahead of the United States in terms of job levels. 2/3 of lost jobs have been recovered by August, and it's only 55% in the U.S. And I believe the U.S. is a G7 country.
Crisis with a much higher unemployment rate than the United States of America because of the anti-job policies of this government. And right now, today, this country has higher unemployment than the U.S., the UK, Japan, Germany, Italy, France, 3 percentage points higher than across the OECD. That is the result of a failed jobs policy here in Canada. When will this government get out of the way so that Canada gets out of last place?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to remind the member for Carleton that going into this crisis, Canada had the lowest unemployment rate we have had in 40 years. And I believe that there were a few Conservative governments during that period. They didn't hit our record. Now, when it comes to international comparison, I think the better metric is labor force participation. Canada is at 78.5%. Australia is only at 77.5%. The U.S. at 73%. At South Korea at 62.1%. We're higher than all of those countries, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Over the weekend, a gangland shooting occurred where the targets were connected to an international money laundering syndicate. Now, these individuals are linked to the Chinese Communist Party efforts to interfere in Canadian politics and disrupt this country's institutions. These same people have rubbed shoulders with well-known Liberals, including former MP Joe Pescasolido, former Minister Raymond Chan, former Liberal Party insider Michael Ching. When will these Liberals temper their affection for the Chinese Communist Party and protect Canada's democracy?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And let me be very clear that our government is actually quite firm in dealing with individuals who are attempting to hide their money in Canada and on organized crime. And I would simply remind the member opposite that in their last 4 years in office, they slashed the budget of law enforcement by over $500 million. They closed 12 integrated proceeds of crime unit. And so tough talk about crime and organized crime and protecting Canadians was backed up by very weak action. And Mr. Speaker, we're reversing the cuts and the slashes that they've made, and we're restoring the capacity of our law enforcement agencies to keep us safe.
The Honourable Minister for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, it's clear that cozying up with the Chinese Communist Party comes with serious consequences. And Joe Pescasolido, whose ethical violation these Liberals tried to cover up in this House last week, is one of the Liberals connected with the incident. Many of the individuals pictured with these senior Liberals have ties to the United Front, an organization that Beijing has been using to suppress pro-democracy rallies in Hong Kong. The Liberals have had these ties for years. When will the Prime Minister finally condemn those who are actively trying to undermine democracy here and in Hong Kong?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to dealing with China, Mr. Speaker. We were the first country in the world to suspend our extradition treaty with Hong Kong, Mr. Speaker. We suspended the export of sensitive equipment to Hong Kong, Mr. Speaker. We're going to announce measures on immigration with respect to Hong Kong, Mr. Speaker. At every step of the way, we have fought for human rights. We're standing up for the people of Hong Kong and the 300,000 Canadians who live in Hong Kong.
Order. I just want to remind the honourable members, usually when the Speaker stands, it means everybody stay quiet. Thank you. And I just want to remind the honourable members that I heard some words, I kind of know where it came from, but be careful on the parliamentary language that you're using. Calling someone else a name is not something that we encourage in the House. Actually, we discourage it.
L'honorable. The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, les Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, the Quebec government had to shut down restaurants and bars. The next day, they announced support for restaurants and bars. The Quebec government also had to shut down theatres. The next day, they announced support for theatres. The government of Canada had to shut down airports. 6 months later, still no help for them. While the transport minister is mulling things over, other countries are supporting their airlines. When's he going to do something? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I'd like to reassure him we are working very hard to find assistance for the airlines in Canada. We know they've been hard hit by this pandemic, and I assure you this is a priority to this government to find solutions to ensure that the airlines are on a sound footing when the economy bounces back. The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, les Patriotes Verchères. It's been a long wait, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, with the borders closed, it was going to be tough for the airlines. They've lost 90% of their sales volume. It's tragic, but still no help from Ottawa. The U.S., for example, has committed $20 billion for airports alone. All this government has done is give Montreal and Quebec City airports a rent holiday, nothing at all for the regions. The airlines are crucial to the economy. 70,000 jobs are at stake. That's over 70,000 families waiting, Mr. Speaker. When is the minister going to do something? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as we said, this is a priority for us. And it was in the throne speech we clearly undertook to help the regions, because the regions have to be served just like every other part of the country. We acknowledge that it's important to do this. It is part of the solution, and we are working on the big picture solution. And once we have something to say, we will say it.
Prince George. The honourable member for Caribou Prince George, I believe, is on mute.
Mr. Speaker, can you hear me now?
There we go. You're on.
Mr. Speaker, Mental Illness Awareness Week is designed to open the eyes of all Canadians to the reality of mental illness. It's incumbent on all of us as leaders of our great country to commit to doing better, being better when it comes to understanding the very real impact of mental illness and injury. Last week, the Minister of Employment made a snide comment about having PTSD as it related to the Phoenix pay system. It's comments like this that further stigmatize and minimizes the impact mental illness and injury have on those suffering in the shadows. Will the Minister apologize to the thousands of Canadians fighting mental illness and injury for this ridiculous comment?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can say that on this side of the House, all members understand that far too many Canadians are living under the shadows of mental illness, and certainly my heart goes out to them and their families. That's why at the beginning of the pandemic, we added an additional $500 million in direct transfers to provinces and territories to boost up capacity to deal with mental illness. We've also launched the wellnesstogether.ca portal at the very beginning stages of the pandemic. I encourage all Canadians to check out this free resource where they can gain access to professionals that can help them in this time of need.
Honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
So the Minister of Employment will not apologize. Mr. Speaker, too many Canadians are struggling with mental illness in silence. Extended periods of isolation and quarantine has led to increased anxiety, stress, substance abuse, domestic violence, and suicide. COVID has pushed those already suffering further into the shadows. Mental health is a cornerstone of public health, and it's critical to our nation's recovery. There is no health without mental health. Canadians need a plan to address this mental health crisis before we go forward. To go forward, where's the plan, Mr. Speaker?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And all along the way, before the pandemic and including after the pandemic, we've been there for provinces and territories to increase their capacity to support people, Canadians who are living with mental illness, and to improve the mental wellness of all Canadians. And I encourage the member opposite to take a look at the wellnesstogether.ca portal, which adds a federal support to the work that provinces and territories are conducting. Mr. Speaker, it is very important that we all have these open and honest conversations about mental illness and wellness in our own personal lives and in our communities. We must break the stigma. We must help people seek help.
The honourable member for Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, last December, the Environment Minister declined to order an impact assessment of the Bighorn mine outside of Hinton, saying it would be dealt with by provincial approval. But on July 30th, ministerial discretion was used to designate the Vista mine expansion to be under federal review. Mr. Speaker, when will this government finally admit they don't want any form of natural extraction in Canada?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his question. He couldn't be farther from the truth, Mr. Speaker. The reality is that we have and continue to support our energy sector workers. Just during this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, we invested over $1.7 billion to help clean up abandoned oil wells. We invested $750 million to support the efforts in the oil sector to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, Mr. Speaker. We've put in place measures to support the workers, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to do that, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to support all Canadians, regardless what sector they're in. We're going to be there for Canadians.
The honourable member for Brampton East.
Mr. Speaker, the residents of Brampton East were thrilled to hear about the recent $45 million transit investment made by our federal government, which is one of the largest investments in Brampton Transit in over 10 years. This funding will allow for increased reliability for riders, add capacity while providing cleaner transit options for the wonderful residents in Brampton. Can the Minister of Infrastructure or Parliamentary Secretary please provide insight into our government's plan for clean transit solutions across the country?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Brampton East for this question and for all of his hard work on behalf of his constituents. Mr. Speaker, we're committed to investing in communities as we build back better from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our Investing in Canada plan means new electric buses, new subways, new bike lanes, new multi-use paths, and we'll continue to invest in public transit and active transportation to help Canadians get to work, back to home, and to their families safely and quickly while creating good jobs, economic growth, and promoting environmentally friendly transportation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very good. The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, the Tri-City COVID-19 testing clinic was run by 10 doctors who gave up their spare time. It was the only clinic in my community, and sadly, their doors closed on October 2nd. The doctors were burning out. Other countries have had rapid testing for months, but the Liberal government has delayed procuring rapid testing devices, and recently approved Abbott ID Now may not arrive in sufficient amounts for months. Will the Prime Minister admit that his failure at rapid tests has caused the clinic in my community to close?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the member opposite's story illustrates why we owe healthcare workers such a debt of gratitude during this incredibly demanding time. In fact, all across the country, healthcare workers are tired. They are exhausted, including public health care workers who are doing the hard work of contact tracing and helping people to isolate. Mr. Speaker, we have accelerated access to rapid testing. In fact, this is the Abbott test is the third rapid test that we've approved. We've had almost 70 gene experts around the country in rural and remote communities for a long time. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to work with all kinds of different test manufacturers to make sure that we have the blend of tools we need. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Mr. Speaker, just a minute ago, the Foreign Affairs Minister said that nobody's going to be tougher on China than they are. Well, that's not what he told Chinese state media. Let me quote, and I would say China stands out as a beacon of stability, predictability, a rule-based system, a very inclusive society, close quote. That's this foreign minister. He's saying one thing to Canadians and another thing to Chinese state-owned media. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the foreign minister is, when is this Liberal government going to temper their affection for the Chinese Communist Party and start putting the interests of this country, of Canadians, first?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy that the member allows me to talk about the leadership we have done around the world when it comes to the Chinese issue, Mr. Speaker. The member knows very well when I was referring to that, and Canadians at home understand that the beacon of stability, predictability, and rule of law is Canada, Mr. Speaker. Everyone in Canada understands and around the world. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we can take a stance in the world, talk for human rights, defend the people of Hong Kong, speak with the Uyghur, speak for the Tibetans. We will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, at every opportunity.
The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All Western Canadians, including our premiers, want to be equal partners in Confederation. Canada's economic recovery plan must be inclusive by considering and respecting the wealth of all provinces, including their natural resources. At a time, Mr. Speaker, when our country so desperately needs to come together, the divisive attitude and actions of the Prime Minister and his government are very disturbing. When will the Prime Minister stop his childish mocking of the concerns of Western Canada and finally begin to address our needs?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government has for many months worked collaboratively with Western premiers and indeed premiers across the country to meet the economic and public health needs of their citizens. I had a conversation with the Premier of Alberta, for example, a few days ago. Very constructive, very positive conversation about what we can do together to support the people of Alberta and to work together to help Canadians in the economic crisis and the public health crisis that all Canadians face.
The Honourable Member for Brampton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the pandemic, the government has made it a priority to support Indigenous communities, which has helped contain the spread of COVID-19 and keep people safe. Our government has committed to walk the path of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and has been focused on implementing commitments made in 2019. Can the Minister of Justice please update the House on our commitment to introduce the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member from Brampton North for her tireless efforts on behalf of Indigenous peoples and the reconciliation process. Our government is committed to advancing the rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis across the country as we walk the path of reconciliation together. As part of that work, we have committed to introducing legislation to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples by the end of 2020. We have been working closely with national Indigenous organizations on a path forward that is adapted to the new circumstances imposed by the pandemic, while collaborating with Indigenous partners and rights holders on the development of the legislation. We look forward to having more to share soon.
Member for North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday vigils were held across the country to honor, remember, and demand justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Indigenous women in my riding, frustrated by the inaction of this government, started the Little Red Dress Project to raise money to put up billboards with names and faces of missing Indigenous women and girls across Vancouver Island. Mr. Speaker, is this what it has come to? Fundraising to save lives? What will it take for this government to move past empty words and actually help to save the lives of Indigenous women and girls in this country?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I share the concern of the member, and I too participated yesterday in October 4th as we honor the lives of those that have gone missing and support the families of the MMIW, G2S, and gender diverse people across this country. Our government is determined to work with all provinces and territories in responding to the first ever national inquiry to make sure that the families can seek justice, receive support, and that we will put in the concrete actions to stop this national tragedy.
Member for Vancouver Granville.
Canadians are horrified by the racism witnessed during the tragic death of Joyce Echaquan. Of course, racism is not new. Indigenous peoples, even those in this chamber, including myself, have experienced racism throughout the history of Canada. Racism occurs in all sectors of society, including governments and political parties. This must change. To the Minister, do you agree that not nearly enough has been done by your government to combat Indigenous-specific racism? Assuming you do, what new concrete and specific actions will you take to combat it? Will you call it out always, and not only when it reaches the front pages?
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister, there we go. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This traumatizing and dehumanizing event that occurred in the death of Joyce Echaquan was an expression of the absolute worst face of racism. Systemic racism in our healthcare system is a national problem, and we must face the reality that our institutions continue to fail Indigenous peoples. It's essential that there be a timely, transparent investigation. We welcome Quebec's decision to act swiftly on the inquest. We know that this is not limited to the healthcare system and expresses itself across all institutions of government. And while much has been done in the last 5 years, much more remains, and we'll continue to work on it diligently and call it out wherever it occurs. I thank the member for her question.
That's all the time we have for questions today. C'est tout le temps qu'on a. Okay. Take it. Tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills. I see that the Minister of Justice is joining us. Good. Mr. Lametti, seconded by Ms. Haidu, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Code, Medical Assistance in Dying. This motion is deemed adopted. Monsieur Lametti, appuyé.
Mr. Lametti, seconded by Ms. Hadju, moves that this bill be now read a first time and printed. This motion is deemed adopted. First reading of this bill.
Quand ce projet de loi...
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House.
Statements by ministers.